So hopefully after you watched lesson 2.2 on complex symbolization and sentential logic, you took a little bit of time and tried to work these problems that I gave you at the end of that video on your own. What we're going to do now is we're going to go over them together, and I'm going to show you my way of reasoning through it. So first, let's do 1C. As you can see, I've copied part of that symbolization key from that page 55. I've only copied the ones that are relevant to these two problems. It would just be too much on the page to copy all of them, including the ones that we don't need. So let's look at 1C. If the Twins and the Mariners both lose tonight, the Angels will move into first place. Here we know we're going to have a material conditional, right? We have that if, and then we have an implicit then, right? So here is where the then should go, but we know we have an implicit then. We see that we're going to have some kind of conjunction, right? We have an and a both, and then we have that they lose. So in our symbolization guide, we only have if the Twin and the Mariners win, so we also know we're going to have some negations. But we know that our main connective here is going to be that conditional, right? That if then. So we know these are going to be in some kind of parentheses. So let's start working on that truth functional paraphrase. We know we're going to start with an if, and then, like I said, we know we're going to have some parentheses here, right? We know it's going to be the case that we're going to have something that captures the meaning of the Twins and the Mariners both lose tonight as our antecedent. So the only thing we have in our symbolization key is the Twins win tonight, and we need to say that they lose. So we're going to say, if it is not the case that the Twins win tonight, and it is not the case that the Mariners win tonight, right? That captures our meaning of the Twins and the Mariners both lose. Then the Angels will move into first place. So that's our truth functional paraphrase there. And as we can see, if we go back through and underline again, we have our if-then statement, which is our main connective. And then we have our negations. It is not the case that. We have a conjunction, and we have it is not the case that. So we need to make sure we capture all of those. So we know we're going to have a conditional. It's going to be our main connective. And we know our antecedent is going to be the Angels move into first place. And in our symbolization key, we know that's going to be N. So now let's do our antecedent. If it is not the case that the Twins win tonight, and it is not the case that the Mariners win tonight. So now we have, if it is not the case that the Twins win tonight, and it is not the case that the Mariners win tonight, then the Angels will move into first place. So the only thing that could be tricky here is not paying attention to your symbolization key. That the Twins and the Mariners both lose, you can't capture those with T and M, right? You have to have those negations involved. The other problem I gave you is a bit longer and a bit more confusing, I would say. So we have the Royals are out of the race for the pennant, and the Yankees will win the pennant if and only if the Twins win tonight and the Mariners and Angels both lose. We already saw how we say two teams both lose, right? So we're going to have a conjunction in there somewhere with negations. When we identify our main connective, here it's going to be this if and only if, right? It's going to be that biconditional with this conjunction on one side and this on the other. So let's look back at our symbolization key as to what we need to do for the Royals are out of the race for the pennant. All we have in the symbolization key is are for the Royals are in the running for the pennant. So we're going to have it is not the case that the Royals are in the running for the pennant. and the Yankees will win the pennant. If and only if, that was already in the way that we want to paraphrase it, the Twins win tonight. And now we need to say the Mariners and the Angels both lose. So it is not the case that the Mariners win tonight. And it is not the case that the Angels win tonight. So now let's go back through and add our parentheses, right? So we know that we want that if and only if to be our main connective here. So we're going to have parentheses on this side. So it is not the case that the Royals are in the running for the pennant and the Yankees will win the pennant. No, we need to have parentheses on this side as well, right? If the Twins win tonight, and it is not the case that the Mariners win tonight, and it is not the case that the Angels win tonight, because we need to say they both lose. Now let's look at the second half again. We have and then we have another and. So we know that we're not done with parentheses, right? As I showed you in that video, when you have more than one conjunction or more than one disjunction in a row, you're going to have to add in more parentheses to make sure that that's a, grammatically correct sentence of sentential logic. So I want to separate the Mariners and the Angels both lose as we have it phrased, truth functionally. It's not the case that the Mariners win, and it's not the case that the Angels win, in another set of parentheses. So we're going to have two closing parentheses there on the end. And now let's do our symbolization based on this key. We have it is not the case that, so that's going to be a negation. It's not the case that the Royals are in the running for the pennant and the Yankees will win the pennant. That's going to be in parentheses as we indicated in our truth functional paraphrase. If and only if, so that's our triple bar for that biconditional. The Twins win tonight, and it's not the case that the Mariners win tonight, and it's not the case that the Angels win tonight. It's important that your negations are inside those parentheses attached to those atomic sentences, because what we want to say is that they both lose. And then we have to have our closing parentheses here. Remember, as I told you, you always want to make sure you have the same number of opening and closing ones to make sure that sentence is right. Now, I don't know if some of you did this, but sometimes students try to do things where they say it's not the case that the Mariners and the Angels win. But remember, all that says is it's not the case that they both win, right? So this would say at least one of them lose. This does not say that both of them lose. So you need to make sure to do it like this, that the Mariners lose tonight and the Angels lose tonight. So let's move on to the second set of problems. We have at least one, for 2C, we have at least one of George, Emily, Donna, and Fred will graduate. And we see an and here, right? But all we're saying is that at least one of them does. So we know we're going to treat this as a disjunction, right? At least one of them will graduate with honors, possibly more. So we're going to have or statements. So let's start breaking this apart into our paraphrase. So George will graduate with honors, or Emily will graduate with honors, or Donna will graduate with honors, or Fred will graduate with honors. So I've just done the dots because you don't need me to take the time to type all of those out and explaining this problem. So there we have our paraphrase. So we know we're going to have, and I gave you an example similar to this with conjunctions. We're going to have 3 disjunctions. And what we need to do here is add in parentheses, right? We can't just have a bunch of disjunctions in a row. Every complete sentence, whether atomic or in a compound, can only be modified by one connective at a time, and each connective needs two complete sentences, either atomic or compound, to be symbolized. So I think the clearest way to do this, at least for me, would be to add our parentheses here, right? George will graduate with honors, or Emily will, or Donna will, or Fred will. So now we have each sentence separated, conjoined by only, each atomic sentence only has one connective, that's the or in the middle, and then this one becomes our main connective. So with putting that in symbolizations, we're going to have G for George will graduate with honors, or E for Emily will graduate with honors, or Donna or Fred will. And of course, as I showed you in that first video, you could do this in a different order of parentheses, right? There's lots of ways that you could arrange them, but I think this is the most intuitive and the clearest way to do it to make sure you don't end up missing parentheses somewhere. So that's the way I would recommend symbolizing this sentence. And that's how we interpret at least one of the four will, right? This will be true if one does, this will be true if they all do, but at least one of them has to for this to be true. So this is probably the longest one to try to do here. Either they, Fred, George, Emily, and Donna, will all graduate with honors, or none of them will. So there are a couple of ways we can symbolize this, and we can interpret this. This is similar to the to other problems we've looked at. So let's start with our paraphrase. We know that our main connective is going to be this or, right? So either they all will, and that's going to be conjunctions, or none of them will. So let's get the first half out of the way, which I think is pretty straightforward. And we'll put that in parentheses to have all of these on one side. And then none of them will be in at least one set of parentheses on the other side. So we're going to have Fred will and George will graduate with honors, and Emily will, and Donna will. And now, just like exactly like the last problem, we're doing with conjunctions here instead of disjunctions, but we're going to need to add parentheses, so these are each individual sentences. So the way that I would do that would be just like this. Fred and George, so now this and only connects the statements Fred will graduate with honors and George will. And then on the other side, Emily will and Donna will. And it's important that we have the same number of open and closing parentheses, so we need to add one more here. And then we have our or, and now we need to look at how we're going to say none of them will. So we could do this by doing the exact same thing we did before and saying it's not the case that Fred will graduate with honors, and it's not the case that George will graduate with honors, and it's not the case that Emily will graduate with honors, and it's not the case that Donna will graduate with honors. And here again, we'd need to add those parentheses, right? So we can do it this way. And so if we do it that way, our symbolization is going to look like this. right? So then only our main connective is not contained in any parentheses. Each sentence is only modified by one thing. Each of our binary connectives are only connected to two sentences, either atomic or compound. This is a perfectly good way to do it. There's one other way that we can do the second half of this. So I'm just going to copy and paste the first half and we'll look at it again. So the other way that we can say none of them will is to say it's not the case that any of them do, right? So it's not the case that Fred or George or Emily or Donna graduates with honors. So we can do it with the negation on the outside of a big disjunction, right? So it's not the case that Fred will graduate with honors or George will graduate with honors or Emily will graduate with honors or Donna will graduate with honors. And then exactly the same as everything we've done so far, we have to add the parentheses so that each disjunction only has one part. So if you symbolized it this way, your first half is going to be exactly the same, right? We're going to have Fred and George and Emily and Donna will all graduate with honors, but this is where it's going to be different. We're going to have the it's not the case here on the outside, and then we're going to say that Fred or George or Emily or Donna graduate with honors. And these are both completely valid ways of doing it. If you did it one way or the other, both are equally good. Whichever way makes the most sense to you is the way that you should stick with. But I know the textbook only gives you one solution, so I did want to show you that there was another way of doing this problem. So let's just quickly look at the last one. George won't graduate with honors, but Fred will, and Donna will graduate with honors if and only if Emily does. So here we've got this comma as a neat little as a neat little indicator that this is going to be one half of the sentence and that this and is going to be our main connective. So we know this is going to be in parentheses and that this side is going to be in parentheses. So we have that negation in there, right? So we know we're going to have parentheses, and then it is not the case that George will graduate with honors. And then we have the word but as we know, that's one of the words that we, when doing our truth functional paraphrase, interpret as and. So, and Fred will graduate with honors. And Donna will graduate with honors if and only if. Thankfully, that was given to us really straightforwardly in the natural English. If Emily graduates with honors. So now we can go ahead and do our symbolization there. We don't have lots of complex things inside those, so we don't have to worry about that. So it's not the case that George graduates with honors, and Fred does graduate with honors, and Donna will graduate with honors if and only if, our biconditional there, Emily graduates with honors. So here again, it's the only one not inside parentheses. We've made it clear in our symbolization that that and is our main connective, and that the biconditional statement on the right is one of those conjuncts, and that conjunction statement on the left is one of those conjuncts. And then, of course, we have the negation here that only modifies the atomic sentence right next to it, And we don't need to add extra parentheses around that because of the common practice to drop extra parentheses around negations that around the outside of negations. So that's the last of these practice problems. I hope this video was helpful to you if you did want to go over them. And I will do the next set.